Welcome, everyone. In today's session, we're going to cover 3 important things: how the class joining workflow is set up so you never miss a session, how to optimize images for your web projects using a powerful online tool, and we'll get a quick preview of what's coming next, the CSS grid topic. Let's dive right in. So the first thing to understand is how the class joining process works. The instructor has set up a single persistent link for the class. This link doesn't change. It stays active throughout the entire course. You don't need to wait for a new link to be sent every session. The class starts at 8 o'clock, and you can join anytime from that point onward. This is a really important point. Unlike WhatsApp-based links that get shared before each class, this link is always there. So bookmark it, save it, and use it every single time. No need to wait for anyone to send you something. Just open the link and join. The instructor also encourages students to join a little early and interact with each other. The goal is to make the class more interactive. When students join, chat, and ask questions, the learning experience becomes much richer for everyone. So don't just sit and wait. Engage with your peers before the session even begins. The instructor made a specific observation. The group class felt less interactive than it should be. Interactive learning isn't just a nice to have. It's actually how concepts stick. When you ask questions, respond to the instructor, and talk with classmates, you process the material more deeply. So participation is strongly encouraged, not optional. Before jumping into the main demo, the instructor briefly revisits Tailwind CSS. A 20-minute introductory video was shared earlier, and it was also touched upon during the Friday discussion session. Today's focus is on actually using Tailwind CSS to build something, specifically a design layout. So if you haven't watched that video yet, it's worth going back to it. Now, let's talk about image optimization. This is a really practical skill for any web developer. Large images slow down your website significantly. The instructor's recommendation is clear. Keep your image files under 100 kilobytes whenever possible. A 1.2 megabyte image, for example, is far too large for a web page. Optimizing images improves load speed and overall user experience. To put this in perspective, the instructor demonstrated an image that was originally 1.2 megabytes. After optimization, it came down to just 73 kilobytes. That's a reduction of over 90%, with almost no visible difference in quality. That kind of improvement can make a huge difference to how fast your website loads. The tool the instructor uses for image optimization is called Squish. You can find it at squish.app. It's a free browser-based tool that lets you compress and convert images without installing anything. What makes it great is the real-time side-by-side comparison. The right side shows your original image, and the left side shows the optimized version, so you can judge the quality difference instantly. The interface is very intuitive. You drag and drop your image in, and Squish immediately shows you a comparison. The left panel is your output, the compressed version, and the right panel is the original. You can drag the divider between them to compare quality at any point in the image. It's a fantastic tool, and the instructor highly recommends it. One thing that came up in class is the HEIC format. This is the default image format used by iPhones. It's a high-quality format, but it's not always web-friendly. The instructor demonstrated converting HEIC images to JPEG first, and then going a step further to AVEF. AVEF is a modern image format that gives you better quality at smaller file sizes compared to JPEG, making it ideal for websites. The instructor's preference is clear. AVEF is the recommended format for web images. It maintains excellent visual quality while producing significantly smaller files than JPEG. Most modern browsers now support AVEF, so it's safe to use for your web projects. When you're working in Squoosh, simply select AVEF as your output format and download the result. Let's walk through the exact process the instructor demonstrated. First, open squoosh.app in your browser. Second, drag and drop your image, whether it's an HEIC, JPG, or PNG. Third, choose your output format. AVEF is recommended for the web. Fourth, use the split view slider to compare the original and optimized versions and make sure quality is acceptable. Finally, hit download, and you're done. One extra tip from the instructor, Squish also lets you manually adjust the quality slider. You can reduce quality slightly beyond the default to get an even smaller file size, and in most cases, the difference is barely noticeable to the human eye. The goal is to find that sweet spot, visually good enough, but as small as possible. Under 100 kilobytes is the target. After downloading the optimized image and placing it into the project, the instructor noticed the layout looked messy. Images were scattered and misaligned. The fix? Flexbox. By applying display flex to the container element, the images immediately line up in a clean side-by-side row. This is a quick and powerful layout technique that every web developer should have in their toolkit. To wrap up today's session, the instructor gave a preview of what's coming next, CSS Grid. Grid is one of the most powerful layout systems in CSS, allowing you to create complex two-dimensional layouts with rows and columns. It builds naturally on what you've already learned with Flexbox. The next session will dive into Grid in detail, so make sure you're caught up and ready to go. There was also a quick discussion about hover effects. A student asked whether a hover style defined in one place could apply to multiple elements, and the answer is yes, absolutely. By defining your hover styles in a shared CSS class, all elements using that class will respond to hover events the same way. This is a great example of writing clean, reusable CSS, and it's something to keep in mind as you practice your designs. Now let's move into something really practical, building a portfolio-style website design. The instructor walks through the entire thought process, from sketching out the layout on a whiteboard to actually coding it up using Tailwind CSS. This is where all the foundational concepts start coming together into a real project. One of the most important lessons here is don't jump straight into coding. Before touching any code, the instructor emphasizes sketching out your layout first. This is called UX wireframing, planning what goes where before you build it. It gives you a clear mental map and saves a lot of confusion later. The instructor sketches three main parts: the nav bar at the top, the hero section, which is the big first thing visitors see, and an about section below. Each of these has a specific name and a specific purpose, and knowing those names helps you communicate clearly when building or discussing designs. The instructor makes an important distinction here. In a professional team, UX designers, sometimes called UX or UI people, are dedicated roles. Their job is to plan and sketch the website, deciding what goes where, what text appears, how users move through the site. Developers then take that plan and build it. But when you're working solo or in a small team, you need to do both. The instructor points out that right now, since there's no dedicated UX person available, everyone needs to learn at least the basics of sketching and planning a layout. It's a skill that makes you significantly more effective as a developer, because you're not guessing as you code. You already have a plan. Let's go over the standard naming conventions for website sections, because these terms come up constantly. The very top bar with navigation links is called the nav bar. The first big section a visitor sees, usually with a headline, image, and call to action buttons, is the hero section. Below that, you have named sections like About, Skills, and Contact. The nav bar typically holds your logo or name and the navigation links. The hero section is the most important real estate on your page. It's what visitors see first. For a portfolio, this usually includes your photo, a short headline about yourself, a brief paragraph, a couple of action buttons, and links to your social media profiles. Here's what the hero section of a portfolio site typically looks like. On one side, you have your identity, your name, a short description of who you are, a couple of buttons like Hire Me or View Work, and social media icons. On the other side, there's a prominent image, usually a professional photo. This two-column layout is clean, scannable, and works well for personal branding. Once the wireframe is done, it's time to set up the project. The instructor creates a dedicated folder for this portfolio project inside their projects directory. Keeping your work organized in clearly named folders is a simple but essential habit, especially as you start building multiple projects over time. Now let's get into the actual layout work. To arrange elements side by side, like the text on the left and image on the right in the hero section, we use Flexbox. In Tailwind CSS, you simply add the class Flex to the parent container, and the children automatically line up horizontally. It's one of the most powerful layout tools you'll use. The key idea is that Flex is applied to the parent container, and it affects how the children are arranged. Without Flex, those two divs would stack vertically, one on top of the other. With Flex, they sit side by side. This is the foundation of almost every two-column layout you'll build. To make each column take up exactly half the available space, we set the width to 50%. In Tailwind, you can write this in two ways. The standard shorthand is W-1/2, which Tailwind recognizes as 50%. Alternatively, you can use the custom value syntax with square brackets, W-50%. Both produce the same result. It's just two different ways of writing it. The instructor also points out that for the image inside the column, you typically want it to fill the full width of its container, so you'd use W-full, which equals 100%. The square bracket syntax is powerful because it lets you use any custom value that isn't part of Tailwind's default scale, giving you full flexibility when you need it. Once your columns are side by side, you'll often notice that the content inside them isn't vertically aligned. One side might be taller than the other. To fix this, Tailwind provides the Items Center class. When applied to the Flex container, it vertically centers all child elements relative to each other. This is the CSS property Align Items Center under the hood. An important typography concept introduced here is line height, the vertical space between lines of text within the same paragraph or element. In standard CSS, it's called line height, and in Tailwind, it's called leading. For example, leading none removes the default line height entirely, making lines very tight. Adjusting this is key to making your text readable and visually comfortable. The instructor clarifies a common question. Line height and line spacing are essentially the same thing. In CSS, it's line height. In Tailwind, it's the leading utility. And in design tools like Figma, it's often called line spacing. They all control that vertical gap between lines of text. Getting this right makes a huge difference in how professional your typography looks. Alongside line height, font size is another fundamental control for typography. In Tailwind, font sizes are set using the text prefix followed by a size keyword, like text SM for small, text XL for extra large, or text 4XL for a large heading. You can also use the bracket syntax for custom pixel values, like text 40 pixels, when you need precise control beyond the default scale. Picking up right where we left off, the first thing when starting any real project is getting your setup right. The instructor creates a dedicated projects folder, names the project portfolio, and opens it directly in VS Code using the Open with Code option. Once inside, an index.html file is created and a boilerplate HTML template is generated. This is your starting point for any HTML-based project. One important habit the instructor emphasizes here is always navigating to the exact correct path before opening VS Code. This avoids confusion about where your files actually live. Right-clicking the folder and choosing Open with Code is the cleanest way to do this. Now, the instructor makes an important distinction. In the real world, most projects use a framework like React or Vue. But when you're building with plain HTML, you still need to know how to set things up properly from scratch. Either way, the setup step is universal. And in this project, that means bringing in Tailwind CSS right from the beginning. Let's talk about typography utilities in Tailwind. The instructor explains that leading none removes the line height, meaning if you had a line height applied, it disappears. Line height and line spacing are essentially the same concept. Font size in Tailwind ranges from 100 to 900, where 900 is the boldest, and as you go lower, the text gets progressively thinner. This weight scale is something worth memorizing. 900 is your heaviest, boldest text. Think big hero headings. As you move toward 100, the text becomes lighter and more delicate. You pick the weight based on the visual hierarchy you're trying to create. Instead of giving margin or padding to each individual child element, the instructor shows a smarter approach. Apply space Y on the parent element. The space Y utility adds a gap along the Y-axis, meaning vertical spacing, between all direct children. Similarly, space X handles horizontal spacing. This is much cleaner than targeting each child separately. The key insight here is that you're styling the relationship between elements, not the elements themselves. The parent controls the spacing, and all children automatically get that gap between them. This keeps your HTML cleaner and your styles more maintainable. For sections, the instructor applies PY10. That's padding on the Y-axis, top and bottom. In Tailwind, PY10 translates to roughly 40 pixels of vertical padding. The instructor notes that if you need a custom value not in Tailwind scale, you can use square bracket notation, for example, PY50px, to define your own exact pixel value. This square bracket syntax is a powerful escape hatch in Tailwind. Anytime the default scale doesn't give you exactly what you need, wrap your custom value in square brackets and Tailwind will generate the CSS for you on the fly. It keeps you from having to write custom CSS classes for one-off values. When using Flexbox, the instructor adds gap 6 to create spacing between the Flex children. This is different from space X or space Y. Gap works specifically within Flex and grid containers. The instructor also adds a subtle background color to the section using the primary color with very low opacity, around 10%, so it's barely noticeable, but adds visual depth. Now, here's a practical workflow tip. The instructor's hero image originally had a background. To remove it, they use the website remove.bg. You upload your image, and it strips the background automatically, giving you a clean PNG. PNG format is what supports transparency, so that's always the output format when you remove a background. One thing to watch out for, the instructor found that remove.bg doesn't accept AVIF format files. The workaround is to use a regular JPEG as input. The site then converts and outputs a PNG with the background removed. Save that file into your project's images folder. This is an important concept for images. If you set only width or only height, the browser maintains the aspect ratio and scales the image correctly. But if you set both width and height to fixed values, the image gets squished or stretched. The solution, if you absolutely need both dimensions, is to use Object Cover. This crops the image to fill the space without distorting it. Think of Object Cover like how a background image works. It fills the container and crops whatever doesn't fit, but it never stretches or squishes the content. The instructor's recommendation is to set just one dimension when possible, or use Object Cover when you need both. The instructor builds two call-to-action buttons for the hero section. The first is a border style button, transparent background with a border and text in the primary color. In Tailwind, just writing border gives you a border in the same color as your text. The second button has a solid primary background with white text. Both get rounded corners using the rounded utility. The border utility in Tailwind is smart. By default, it inherits the current text color. So if your text is your primary color, your border automatically matches. You can override this with a specific border color class if needed. Rounded corners are added with rounded or rounded MD for a slightly more pronounced curve. To make the social media buttons functional, the instructor adds target_blank to each anchor tag. This opens the link in a new browser tab instead of navigating away from the portfolio. Each button gets its own href, the Facebook profile URL, the GitHub profile URL, and the LinkedIn profile URL. The instructor shows how to find your LinkedIn URL by going into your profile page. Using target blank is a best practice for external links in a portfolio. You don't want visitors to accidentally leave your site when clicking a social link. Each platform, Facebook, GitHub, LinkedIn, has a unique profile URL you can find by visiting your own profile page and copying the URL from the address bar. With the hero section structure and interactions in place, the instructor turns to the final polish, custom typography using Google fonts. The default browser font is functional but not visually distinctive. Bringing in a Google font gives the portfolio a more professional, intentional look. This is the last step before the hero section is considered complete. Picking up from where we left off. Now let's walk through how Tailwind CSS is set up directly from HTML, without any downloads or build tools. The very first step is always setup, and this is common across any project. You start by heading to the Tailwind CSS official website, clicking Get Started, and then navigating to the Play CDN section. Inside the Play CDN section, you'll find a script tag, a single line of code. You copy that link and paste it into your HTML file. That's all it takes to bring Tailwind into your project without installing anything. It's really important to understand this distinction. The Play CDN approach is meant for development purposes only. You should never use it in a production environment. The reason the instructor chose to teach this method first, without downloading anything, is that many beginners find the download and configuration process overwhelming. The goal right now is to learn Tailwind itself, not get stuck on tooling. After adding the Tailwind CDN script, the next step is bringing in Font Awesome, an icon library that's extremely useful for portfolio and UI projects. You do this by visiting cdnjs.com, searching for Font Awesome, and copying the CDN link from the middle section of the result. You then paste that link right below your Tailwind script tag in the HTML head. Specifically, you want the link from the middle portion of the Font Awesome entry on cdn.js. That's the style sheet link. Once copied and pasted into your HTML, you now have both Tailwind CSS and Font Awesome ready to use, all without a single npm install. Before writing a single line of CSS, it's a good practice to decide on your design system up front, especially your color palette. For this portfolio project, the instructor walks through defining what the primary color will be, what accent colors to use, and where each will appear. This makes your styling consistent and intentional throughout the entire project. In the project, all these primary colors are defined in one central place, usually in a Tailwind config or a CSS variables block. When the instructor references primary throughout the code, it always maps back to this single definition. That's the power of planning your palette before you build. The instructor makes an interesting point here. Rather than using AI to generate the entire design, you can use it as a suggestion tool. Ask it for color palette ideas, font pairings, or layout inspiration, and then make the final decisions yourself. This is a healthy and productive way to collaborate with AI, especially when you're still learning design fundamentals. Full AI-driven workflows will be covered later in the course. Now, let's talk about Google Fonts. The default system font is clean, but can feel too plain for a portfolio. The instructor heads to fonts.google.com and searches for fonts that are commonly used in professional web design, things like Roboto, Open Sans, and Montserrat. For this project, Montserrat is chosen as the body font, and a slightly more distinct semi-cursive style font is selected for headings. The workflow on Google Fonts is straightforward. You search for the font you want, click Get Font, then go to Get Embed Code, switch to the Import tab, and copy the @import link that appears. This link is what you'll paste at the very top of your CSS style sheet, before any other styles. Once you have the Google Fonts import link, you place it at the very top of your style sheet. For the body font, Montserrat in this case, you apply the font family rule directly to the body fag. This means every piece of text on the page inherits that font automatically. For titles, since you want something a bit more distinctive, a separate CSS class called .title is created with its own font family. This separation is intentional and smart. The body font sets the tone for all readable text, paragraphs, labels, navigation. The title font is reserved specifically for headings, giving them a visual hierarchy that makes the page feel polished and well-designed. You then add the .title class to any heading element in your HTML where you want that special font to appear. So by this point in the setup, your HTML head section has everything it needs. You have the Tailwind CDN script bringing in the utility-first CSS framework, the Font Awesome CDN link for icons, and the Google Fonts import for your chosen typefaces. This three-part setup is the foundation that every project in this course will build on, and it's all done without installing a single package. So here's a real problem every developer runs into. You pick a color for your portfolio, say a vibrant orange, and you use it everywhere. Text, buttons, borders, hover effects. Then later, you decide you don't like it. Now you have to hunt down every single place you use that color and change it manually. That's tedious, error-prone, and completely avoidable. The solution is CSS variables, also called custom properties. Instead of writing the same hex code over and over, you define it once at the top, give it a name, and then reference that name everywhere. When you want to change the color, you update it in exactly one place, and every element using that variable updates automatically. Before we jump into the syntax, let's understand what a variable actually is. Think of it as a named box, a container that holds some data. In programming, any language, JavaScript, Python, CSS, uses the same concept. You give the box a name, put data inside it, and later you just call that name to get the data back out. The instructor used a great example here. Imagine the text Sudham Shrestha appearing in 3 different places on a page. Instead of typing that name 3 times, you store it once in a variable called name and call that variable wherever you need it. Change the variable and all 3 places update instantly. The same logic applies perfectly to colors in CSS. In CSS, variables are declared inside a special selector called :root. The :root block is the declaration zone. It's where you define variables that are available to your entire page. Each variable name must start with 2 dashes. That's the CSS syntax rule, similar to how JavaScript uses let or Python uses an equal sign. Then you write a colon, the color value, and a semicolon. 2 important things to notice here. First, the double dash before the variable name is not optional. It's the required syntax that tells CSS this is a custom property you've defined, not a built-in one like color or margin. Second, placing this inside :root means these variables are available globally. Any element on the page can use them. You cannot use ++ or any other prefix. It must be double dash. Once you've declared your variables in :root, using them is straightforward. Instead of writing the raw hex code, you write var followed by parentheses, and inside the parentheses you put the variable name, including the double dashes. So var --primary retrieves whatever color you stored under that name. Notice how the right side is much more readable. You can immediately understand what role each color plays. One thing the instructor emphasized, the syntax uses small round brackets for var, not square brackets or curly braces. Regular CSS values in Tailwind classes use square brackets for customization, but CSS variables are always called using var with round brackets. This distinction is important to remember so you don't mix up the syntax when switching between plain CSS and Tailwind. This is the real payoff of using variables. Imagine your entire portfolio uses the primary color in 20 different places: headings, buttons, borders, links, hover states. If you decide to switch from purple to orange, you change exactly one line, the value assigned to primary inside :root. Every single element that references var primary updates automatically. No find and replace, no hunting through your style sheet. This is exactly why professional developers always set up color variables at the start of a project. It's not extra work up front, it's an investment that saves enormous time later. The instructor made this point clearly. Define your colors once using an AI tool like DeepSeek to suggest a color palette, store them as variables, and then you have full control over your entire site's theme from a single location. The instructor's workflow for choosing colors involves using AI tools for suggestions rather than guessing. For design work, color palettes, layout ideas, CSS styling, DeepSeek is the recommended tool. You simply describe your theme, for example, Purple Developer Portfolio, and ask it to suggest primary, secondary, accent, background, and text colors. It gives you a complete, harmonious palette instantly. The instructor uses 3 AI tools with distinct purposes. ChatGPT handles general questions and small error fixes. Grok is better for logical, back-end, and dynamic website work. DeepSeek is specifically preferred for design tasks, HTML, CSS, and Tailwind styling. Knowing which tool to reach for based on the task type makes your workflow much more efficient. For the color palette setup we're doing now, DeepSeek is the go-to choice. Here's what a complete color variable setup looks like in practice. You define all your theme colors inside :root at the very top of your style sheet. Then, in the body role, you apply the background and text colors using var. Primary and secondary colors are reserved for components like buttons, headings, and interactive elements deeper in the page. This gives you a fully organized, maintainable color system from the start. A few things to note in this setup. The :root block is your single source of truth for all colors. The body rules sets the page-wide defaults. You don't have to use every variable in the body. Primary and secondary colors will be used when you build individual components like navigation bars, cards, and buttons. The key is that all your color decisions are centralized, named meaningfully, and easy to update. Let's consolidate the comparison. Using raw hex codes directly is fine for tiny projects, but it falls apart the moment you need to make a change or scale up. CSS variables win on every front. Your code is more readable because variable names describe intent, maintenance is trivial because changes happen in one place, and scaling to a large project is manageable. This is a foundational best practice, not an advanced technique. The instructor's recommended approach is to start with internal CSS, writing your styles inside a style tag in the HTML head, and then move them to an external style sheet once things are working. This is a practical learning strategy. You can see everything in one file while you're experimenting, then organize properly when you're ready. The variable declarations move with your styles. The :root block goes into your external CSS file just as is. Continuing from where we left off, let's dig into how containers are defined in a Tailwind-based layout. A container is essentially a box that holds your page content, and it has side gaps, spacing on the left and right edges. You define a width for it, and then set margin to auto, which centers it perfectly between those two sides. The width of the container is typically given in percentages, not fixed pixels. 6% is a commonly used gap size on each side. The key reason for using percentages here is responsiveness. On a large screen, 6% translates to a bigger gap. On a smaller screen, it naturally shrinks proportionally. This means your layout adapts gracefully, without extra code. This is the core advantage of percentage-based sizing. If you gave the container a fixed pixel width, say 1,000 pixels, that would overflow a small mobile screen entirely, covering it edge to edge or beyond. With percentages, the same rule works beautifully across every device size. The container always fits, always centers, and always breathes. Let's make the pixel versus percentage argument concrete. If you hard-code a container width at 1,000 pixels, it looks fine on a large desktop monitor. But on a phone, 1,000 pixels is wider than the entire screen. Your content spills out, the user has to scroll horizontally, and the layout breaks completely. Fixed pixels are simply not device-aware. Percentage-based widths, on the other hand, are always relative to the parent or viewport, so the container naturally fits within whatever screen it's rendered on. Images and graphic assets like banners can still be delivered in pixels. That's fine for media files. But the structural layout container itself should use percentages for true responsiveness. Once the container styles are defined, the next step shown here is moving them out of inline or embedded styles into a dedicated external CSS file called style.css. You add a link tag in the HTML head pointing to this file and paste your container rules there. Keeping styles external makes the codebase cleaner and easier to maintain as the project grows. With the container setup done, the focus shifts to the overall page body structure. Every page is divided into three fundamental sections: the header at the top, the main content area in the middle, and the footer at the bottom. This is a standard semantic HTML structure that provides a clear blueprint for building out each section one at a time. The header section contains the navigation bar. The recommended approach here is to complete one section entirely before moving on to the next. So you build out the full header, structure first, then styling, and only then move down to the main content area. This disciplined top-down workflow prevents confusion and keeps development organized. Now, let's talk about transition timing. When you hover over an element, you often want that style change to happen smoothly rather than instantly. Tailwind provides a duration utility for exactly this. You can specify how long the transition takes, for example, 0.6 seconds, and the browser will animate the change over that time period. An important distinction is being made here between two types of Tailwind values. When you write a value inside square brackets, like duration-0.6 seconds, that is a custom arbitrary value. It's your own value, not one from Tailwind's predefined scale. When you write a class without brackets, like duration 500, you're using Tailwind's built-in scale. Square brackets signal customization. This distinction between default Tailwind values and custom arbitrary values is fundamental to working with Tailwind effectively. Tailwind ships with a carefully designed design system: spacing, font sizes, durations, colors, all on a consistent scale. When those defaults fit your design, use them directly. When you need a specific value that falls outside that scale, square brackets let you inject any custom value inline. The practical rule of thumb is this: if a custom value appears repeatedly across many elements, it makes sense to define it in your style sheet as a CSS variable or a Tailwind theme extension. But if it's a one-off adjustment for a single element, the square bracket syntax is perfectly appropriate and keeps things concise. This is exactly how the instructor uses it in practice. The last concept introduced in this section is object fit. When you define both a fixed width and a fixed height on an image element, the browser by default will stretch or squish the image to fill that box exactly, distorting its aspect ratio. This is a very common layout problem, and object fit is the solution. The first option is object fit cover. With this value, the image scales up or down to completely fill the container while preserving its natural aspect ratio. If the image is wider than the container, the sides get cropped. If it's taller, the top and bottom get cropped. The important thing is the image never gets distorted. It always looks natural, just cropped to fit the box. Moving into the header section now. The header contains what's called a nav bar. And the key idea here is that you finish the header completely before moving on to anything below it. The header is divided into two parts. On one side, you have the brand name or logo wrapped in a strong tag, and on the other side, you have your navigation links. The entire nav is the parent element. Inside it, there are two child divs. The first div holds the brand name, written inside a strong tag, not a heading tag, because headings are for page titles, not navbars. The second div holds the navigation links. Inside the second div, we have 4 anchor tags: home, about, skills, and contact. Anchor tags are inline elements by default, which means they naturally appear on the same line. So when you write 4 anchor tags inside a div, they line up horizontally without any extra effort. That's your basic navigation structure. This is an important distinction. Because anchor tags are inline elements, you don't need to do anything special to get them on one line. They just sit next to each other. This is the raw HTML structure. Now the next step is styling it. To align the two divs inside the nav side by side, we apply display flex to the parent element. In Tailwind CSS, you simply write flex as a class, and it automatically applies display flex. This is one of the big advantages of Tailwind. You don't have to jump into a separate style sheet to write CSS. So on the parent nav element, you add the class flex, and immediately those two child divs sit side by side. That's the power of Tailwind's utility classes. One word does the work of a full CSS property declaration. Now, to push the brand name to one side and the navigation links to the other, we use justify content space between. In Tailwind, this is written as justify between. Space between distributes the available space between the two child elements, pushing them to opposite ends of the container. The difference between gap and justify between is important. Gap adds a fixed amount of space between elements. Justify between, on the other hand, uses all the available space and pushes elements to opposite ends. For a header layout where you want the logo on the left and links on the right, justify between is the right choice. The side padding you see in the header, that space between the content and the screen edge, comes from a container class applied to the inner div. The header itself stretches full width, but the container inside it constrains the content and adds consistent horizontal padding. This is a common and clean layout pattern. For styling the header, there are two common directions. If you're going with a purple theme, you'd apply a background color using the primary color variable and set the text to white. If you prefer a white theme, you skip the background color and just add a shadow beneath the header to give it a subtle separation from the page content below. In Tailwind, writing just shadow applies a default box shadow. You don't need to manually write box shadow properties. And if you need a larger shadow, Tailwind gives you size variants: shadow-MD for medium, shadow-LG for large, shadow-XL for extra large, and shadow-2XL for the biggest. Each one increases the shadow's spread and blur. Beyond size, Tailwind also lets you define the color of a shadow. You write the shadow size class first, then add a shadow color class. For example, shadow-MD followed by shadow-gray-500 or shadow-red-500. The color goes inside square brackets if you're using an arbitrary value. This gives you precise control over how the shadow looks. When it comes to spacing out the navigation links, there are three approaches. The worst option is applying margin or padding to each anchor tag individually, because if you add a new link later, you have to remember to style that one too. A better option is using the gap class on the flex parent. But the best Tailwind approach is SpaceX, which automatically applies equal horizontal spacing to all child elements. SpaceX is the recommended approach because it scales automatically. As you add more links to the nav, the spacing adjusts without you touching a single style. The number after SpaceX, like SpaceX6, controls the amount of spacing. And if your content is stacked vertically, SpaceY does the same thing on the y-axis. Now, let's talk about object fit. When you define both a height and a width on an image element, the image can get squished or distorted to fit those dimensions. Object fit is the CSS property and Tailwind utility that prevents this. It tells the browser how the image should behave inside its defined box. There are two main values for object fit. Object cover makes the image fill the entire defined area. It scales up and crops whatever doesn't fit. Object contain keeps the entire image visible within the box, but it may leave empty space around the image. Cover is typically used for hero images and thumbnails where you want full coverage. Contain is useful when you need to see the whole image without cropping. In Tailwind, you simply write object cover or object contain on the image element. No extra CSS needed. Object cover crops the image to fill the box. You can see the overflow is hidden. Object contain shrinks or fits the image so the entire thing is visible, which can leave gaps depending on the image's aspect ratio. With the header complete, the next part of the page is the hero section, which lives inside the main element. All the primary page content goes inside main. The hero section starts with a section tag, and inside that section, a div begins the actual content. The container class on this div is what gives the consistent side padding you see across the header and hero section alike. Let's talk about the hero section structure. The hero section lives inside our main element. Inside the section, we have a container div, and that container is split into two parts. One side holds the text content, which includes a heading, a paragraph, and social media icons, and the other side holds the hero image. This two-column layout is the foundation of a typical portfolio hero section. Inside the content div, we have three main elements stacked vertically. First is the heading. This is typically your name or a bold tagline. Below that is a paragraph for a brief description. And at the bottom, we have a parent div that wraps all the social media icon links. Each icon is an anchor tag that navigates to an external profile. The right side of the hero section contains just one thing, the hero image. This is your profile photo or a featured image. It's placed inside its own div, and the image tag should always have a proper alt attribute filled in. Never leave accessibility attributes empty. They matter for screen readers and SEO. Here's what the actual HTML looks like for the content side. We have a heading element, a paragraph with some placeholder text, and then a wrapper div for our icons. Each social media icon is wrapped inside an anchor tag, so when a user clicks the icon, they get sent to the corresponding social media link. The href attribute on each anchor tag holds the destination URL. One thing worth noting, if you need to break a line of text within the same tag, you use the BR element. This is a self-closing tag that forces the text to continue on the next line. But be careful, BR is meant for breaking a continuous line, not for creating spacing or gaps between elements. For spacing, use CSS margin or padding instead.
Each social media icon needs its own individual anchor tag. This is really important. If you put all 3 icons inside a single anchor tag, clicking any one of them will take the user to the same link because there's only one href. So Facebook, GitHub, and Instagram each need their own separate anchor tag with their own href attribute pointing to the correct profile URL.
This is a common mistake beginners make. When you nest multiple icons inside a single anchor tag, you only have one href, which means clicking any icon, Facebook, GitHub, or Instagram, sends the user to the exact same place. Always wrap each icon in its own anchor tag, so each one can have a unique destination. For the social media icons, the instructor uses Font Awesome, available at fontawesome.com. You search for the icon you need, for example, Facebook, GitHub, or Instagram. Pick the free version and copy the icon class code. These icon classes are then placed inside your anchor tags to render the actual icon on screen. It's a quick and clean way to add professional-looking icons without creating image files. When adding the hero image to your project, copy your chosen photo into the Images folder of your project. Then rename it something meaningful, like Hero for the Hero section image. The instructor recommends naming images based on which section they belong to, so Hero section image becomes Hero. About section image becomes About, and so on. You can only change the name before the dot. The file extension, like .jpeg or .png, must stay the same. The image tag for the hero section uses the source attribute to point to the file path, images/hero.jpg, and the alt attribute should describe the image meaningfully. The instructor emphasizes never leaving the alt attribute empty. Even if the description isn't perfect, something meaningful is always better than nothing. These attributes matter for accessibility and good coding practice. Sometimes your image might not display in the browser. This often happens when the file format isn't supported. For example, HEIC files from iPhones don't render in all browsers. The solution is to convert the image to a web-friendly format like JPEG or PNG. The instructor recommends a free online tool called Squoosh, available at squoosh.app, which not only converts file formats, but also compresses image file sizes, which helps your website load faster. Squoosh is a fantastic free tool. You drag your image in, choose the output format, like JPG or WebP, and it compresses the file size significantly. Smaller image files mean faster page load times, which is important for both user experience and search engine ranking. This is a tool every web developer should know about. Once the image is displaying, you may notice it looks stretched or doesn't fill its container properly. This is where the CSS object fit property comes in. Setting object fit to cover makes the image fill the entire container while maintaining its aspect ratio. It may crop the edges slightly. Setting it to contain keeps the whole image visible, but may leave empty space around it. For hero section photos, cover is usually the better choice.
Now let's talk about the box model, specifically padding. The container div we use inside sections adds horizontal padding on the left and right sides. This is what creates the breathing room between your content and the edges of the screen. Every section on the page, the hero section, the header, all share this same container class, so they all get consistent side spacing automatically. The key insight here is that by defining the container class once in your CSS with a set padding, every section that uses that container class inherits the same spacing. This is the power of reusable CSS classes. You define the rule once, and it applies everywhere consistently. If you ever need to adjust the spacing, you only change it in one place. The instructor also introduces the hover pseudo-class for the icon links. When you write a selector followed by :hover, any CSS rules inside that block apply only when the user's mouse is over that element. This is how you create interactive effects, like an icon changing color or scaling up slightly when hovered. It might seem like a lot of CSS classes at first, but with practice, it becomes very natural. And that wraps up the hero section and the box model padding concepts. To recap, structure your hero section as 2 columns, give every icon its own anchor tag, use Font Awesome for clean icons, name your image files clearly by section, use Object Fit Cover to handle image sizing, use Squoosh to fix format issues and reduce file size, and rely on your container class to keep spacing consistent across the whole page. Next up, the instructor mentioned covering the grid topic, so that's something to look forward to. Great work getting through all of this.